For today's video, we will be going to talk about China's financial crisis is almost coming. China's Taiwan crisis, CCP will never invade. Let's get started. 10:30 on August 2nd, the Pelosi aircraft flies over Taiwan. The entire world kept their eyes peeled to see if this signaled the outbreak of World War III. Chinese officials warned that if Pelosi arrived in Taiwan, the Chinese army would be forced to launch an invasion. In fact, this was posted a few days earlier with the caption "Ready for War" on the official page Chinese army account, and it received millions of likes, whereas a representative of China's state media tweeted directly about targeting a sitting U.S. congressman. But the CCP's next move astonished the entire globe when the plane dropped slowly into Taiwan. It had no value, practically nothing. The only threats were loud barks that lacked any bite. This sparked a chain of events that might lead to the CCP's demise. People in China are currently debating whether the current leaders are courageous enough to safeguard China's sovereignty. The CCP had to shut down Chinese social media sites in order to stop the dissemination of news since the uproar had become so severe, so that individuals couldn't remark on the news. State-run media outlets had to disable comments on their websites. Popular memes like this one that ridiculed the CCP's ineptitude began to circulate on social media. However, this is nothing new. In fact, during the past 40 years, the CCP has carried out this action many times. And today in this video, I want to explain why the CCP consistently declares that it will invade even if it never actually does. Why do Chinese citizens doubt the CCP's capacity to protect China? And why is there only one scenario in which the CCP will actually launch an attack? Essential for us to fully comprehend the CCP's connection with Taiwan at this time. To understand why China still views Taiwan as a part of itself, it is necessary to first take a step back in time. Now, just like any other history, the history of China and Taiwan is extensive. I'm going to skim over some of this. But in the 1800s, Taiwan was a part of the Qing Empire, which effectively reigned over the entirety of modern-day China. However, the First Sino-Japanese War saw the defeat of Qing government and the Japanese soldiers' occupation of Taiwan in 1895, at which point we turn our attention to mainland China and quickly advance the action. The Republic of China, sometimes known as the ROC, acquired control of mainland China in 1912 after overthrowing the Qing Empire. Keep in mind the ROC because it is still significant today when the ROC meets the USA and the UK near the conclusion of World War II. They emphasized that although Japan is in charge of Taiwan, it's actually kind of a part of China. Therefore, if you could include Taiwan's return to ROC and the negotiation for Japan's surrender, that would be greatly appreciated. Thus, mainland China and Taiwan were completely under the control of the ROC, the Chinese government in power at the time. However, the Communist Army, led by a guy named Mao Zedong, starts a full-scale civil war when the ROC becomes preoccupied with all of this. When he gained power, he established the People's Republic of China, or PROC, which later changed its name to the Chinese Communist Party. At this point, the ROC leaves mainland China and relocates to Taiwan. Mao was not pleased that the previous administration had taken a portion of his China. He made the decision to invade Taiwan and failed, but this was not the end. Mao was not pleased that the previous administrations had taken a portion of his China. He made the decision to invade Taiwan and failed, but this was not the end. Mao had already begun making preparations for the second invasion of Taiwan. At this point, the United States intervened to prevent a non-communist administration from falling victim to communism. Congress enacted a law guaranteeing American help in the event that Taiwan is attacked. Mao was warned by the US that we would destroy China if he didn't leave Taiwan alone. China came to the realization that having nuclear weapons would help them become a superpower at this point. For a while, even the prospect of nuclear war didn't deter invasions, but Mao was never successful, and he passed away in 1976. Since then, there haven't been any invasions, but there have been numerous rumors and threats of invasions. The relationship between China and Taiwan began to improve a little after Mao's death. Taiwan reduced regulations and restrictions on visits to China, and in 1991, the ROC, or the Republic of Health, declared that the conflict with the CCP was finished. Taiwan would have a great deal of autonomy under China's one nation, two systems proposal, according to China, if it decides to submit to Beijing's rule. The 1997 return of Hong Kong to China was supported by this system. How it was governed up until recently, when Beijing decided to try to expand its power. Thus, things didn't turn out as expected in Taiwan and Hong Kong. They turned down the offer back then because they anticipated this. At this point, the CCP's headache only begins to throb. Taiwan had its first democratic elections to choose its leaders in 1994. China gathered a number of troops and military hardware on the beach closest to Taiwan and began a show of force in an effort to undermine democracy and the right of Taiwanese citizens to vote. Washington arrives at this point to defend Taiwan as required by American law. The United States Navy deploys all of its largest and most sophisticated ships, missiles, and jets. This was done to merely convey the message that a fight with Taiwan would involve the most potent force in the world. China was compelled to lower its guard, and the situation improved, as if democracy in a territory controlled by China weren't horrible enough. The new president openly supported independence from China in 2000. Many of you may be wondering why Taiwan isn't now regarded as independent if it has its own government, since there is only one China, which includes Taiwan. The ROC and CCP have generally agreed on this point. However, both parties argue on who is the true government of this particular China. The ROC is deemed genuine by the CCP, and vice versa. Initially, all nations recognized the ROC as China's legitimate government. But when fighting and dissension erupted, Taiwan began to develop its own unique identity. The United Nations also gave the seat for China to the CCP. Taiwanese citizens increasingly identify as Taiwanese, not Chinese, and the ROC truly has no trouble leaving mainland China to the CCP. It just opposes the CCP in Taiwan. However, fewer than a dozen nations currently recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state, contrary to common opinion. The United States is not one of them. Washington has adopted an ambitious strategic approach. The United States adheres to the One China policy and views the CCP as the legitimate government, since it didn't want to argue with the CCP on Taiwan. However, it has also promised to give Taiwan defense gear and emphasized that any invasion by China would be of great worry. But lately, this attitude has been shifting. Taiwan's autonomy is thus in a precarious situation. Although in 2000, a Taiwanese president publicly backed independence for the first time, the CCP was alarmed by this and enacted the Anti-Secession Law, which gave China the right to use force against Taiwan if it attempted to split from China. Because of its outspoken support for independence, the DDP party has earned the moniker pro-independence party. When they are in power in Taiwan, China escalates its threat towards Taiwan, as if they hadn't already tried military action. Then this man gained power in 2013. He wants to break new ground in order to accomplish his objectives of being the greatest leader in Chinese history, the significant unification of China. He wants to quietly reunify Taiwan with China while also flaunting his military mights and tanks. Therefore, anytime there are discussions about Taiwan's independence, China has the perfect pretext to show off its might, even while the president publicly supported independence in 2000s. It isn't really the case anymore, and this is where the issues begin. Taiwanese people do not desire independence either. Only 5% of Taiwanese people, according to the most recent surveys, wish to be independent. The overwhelming majority of 82% simply want the status quo to maintain that tactical ambiguity. They merely desire freedom and peace. Therefore, why is the CCP taking much a strident stance against Taiwanese independence? You can tell that Taiwan is aware of something that many people outside of the country aren't. However, China cannot afford to wage war with Taiwan and subsequently with the USA due to the high cost involved. It's just too appealing to play the victim in this situation. The independence of Taiwan hasn't already changed as a result of Nancy Pelosi's visit. However, if China can make the case that the US is meddling in its internal matters, it will give its people someone to hate. Additionally, the CCP desperately needs a diversion from its own issues. China is having trouble. The country's real estate bubble, which accounts to 30% of its GDP and 75% of household wealth, is busting. The CCP's zero coveted policy is killing any economic growth the nation was experiencing this year. And to put the icing on the cake, the Hanan banking protests are shattering the public's confidence in the banking systems and the capacity of the government to safeguard its citizens. Now, all of this is not good for any leader at any point in time. The fact that President Xi intends to secure an unprecedented third term at the Chinese Communist Party's 20th Congress later this year makes the current predicament considerably more awkward. For the president who wants to reaffirm to the people that he is the proper person to manage the country, things do not look good. China's GDP barely increased by 0.1% in the third quarter, bringing the annual GDP growth down to 4.5%. The CCP hasn't missed its 5.5% GDP growth goal in 30 years, which is the first time it has happened. China's economic slump has had repercussions felt all across the world. How does this affect your wallet then? Although markets trade the second derivative, economists are concerned with the first. The markets have gone crazy this year, and the CPI, PPI, and wage data create a complicated picture. In addition, $13 trillion are burning away in flames, and record high inflation implies that your money will be worth half as much in 2030. However, one asset does well in these circumstances. Contemporary art has great resilience, inflation hedging properties, and low connection stocks. Morgan Stanley claims that it frequently exhibits lower volatility than stocks. Additionally, when inflation was last this high, demand for today's sponsor Masterworks was at an all-time high since it soared in value more than gold, real estate, or the S&P 500. People are now the largest buyers in the art market as they seek to diversify, selling stocks and modern works of art by famous artists like Banksy and Picasso. They have so far sold 5 paintings with an advantage net return to investors of 268.8%. There is a wait list due to the overwhelming demand. All of this is making Xi lost support. However, that doesn't mean he won't be given a third term, although he continues to be very powerful. Public confidence in him is gradually declining. Xi has utilized anti-corruption investigations to target anyone who disagreed with his reign within the party in order to quell any dissent. To purge anyone believed to be Xi unfaithful, leaders will be detained and charged. Sending a message is another goal of this anti-corruption investigation, similar to Putin's relationship with oligarchs. Xi wants to underscore to China's elites that success and wealth are nothing if you aren't a party loyalist. President Xi can use fabricated corruption allegations to subdue party officials, but it's challenging to do so with the general population, especially in a country with more than 1 billion inhabitants. Because of this, the CCP promotes nationalism. Many nations frequently adapt to approach of making an enemy abroad in order to gain domestic support. This has been going on for decades, even with the CCP. Taiwan is a part of China, and Chinese nationals have long been informed. Taiwan is not referred to as a renegade province by Chinese nationals. Rather, they view it as a province like any other, in order to divert attention away from internal issues. It is simple to label a situation like Pelosi's visit as a master of exterior national security. China's GDP is 6 times less than the USA's per person, although it is closer to nations like Mexico, Thailand, and Brazil than the United States. It spends the second most money on its military. When you can persuade the populace that there is an enemy outside trying to take away Chinese territory, it is much simpler for the government to defend by spending so much money on military. Taiwan is currently much more valuable to the CCP as a diversion for regional issues than as a means of actual control. The CCP has the right to yell about the crisis in Taiwan, whether there is an internal issue, to draw the public's focus away from new internal issues. However, this is where the CCP encounters a new issue. If you repeatedly yell the same thing without taking much action, it will lose its impact. Even worse, though, is the risk of losing the trust of your own people in your ability to carry out your promises. The one thing that Xi Jinping fears the most now are the very same people the CCP relied on to fuel nationalism. There was no difference in the build-up to Pelosi's visit. If Pelosi arrived and government followed through, voters expected the government to be harsh and stern, with warnings. A Chinese state media official actually tweeted about targeting a sitting member of the U.S. Congress, while this was posted by the official China Twitter account just a few days earlier and received millions of likes. The issue with these warnings is that China incorrectly predicted how the American people and government would respond. Pelosi's trip to Taiwan received support from members of both parties and party supporters on an bipartisan basis for what looks to be the first time in decades. This was unanticipated by the CCP. Chinese nationalists had stopped having faith in the administration as her plane touched down in Taiwan. The level of fury allegedly reached such a high that the government was forced to shut down Chinese social media platforms in order to prevent citizens from criticizing the CCP. Protests were organized the next day in response to CCP's failure to halt Pelosi. And due to excessively irate users, state media was forced to cut off comments on their website. If you guys can post this video on social media and in your friends group, it will be very helpful because it's likely that the CCP bot army has also been working hard on social media platforms to drone out any news of this hitting the global news cycle. China has responded by announcing military drills and training operations near Taiwan to demonstrate its ability to capture the islands. The nationalists may be calmed by this, or they may not. However, one thing is certain: the CP is engaging in risky behavior. utilizing nationalism as a diversion from domestic issues, a game with the power to topple the government. The issue with nationalism is that it might backfire if you don't act harsh enough. People will start to wonder if the country's existing leaders are best ones to guide it. And if the CCP ever finds itself in a situation where conquering Taiwan is the only option for survival, I believe we all know what will happen. Now, while all of this is logical reasoning, it becomes obvious that logic has no place in authoritarian systems because majority of decisions are made by a single individual. I think it was a big error on the part of Xi to prioritize reunification during his rule. He might have to start a conflict that will undoubtedly have no winners if he wants to save face. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, turn on the notification bell, and subscribe to Wealth-ology for more videos like this. Thank you for stopping by to watch. See you in our next video.